Fashion has been speeding up for hundreds of years.
That is the problem. The buy it, the wear it once, to throw it away.
Daily new stock with Shein is just the latest leap in centuries of fashion acceleration.
A good quality garment, it does not look like that. We no longer understand what good quality clothing is, and it's so heartbreaking. I am very excited to be here today with Dr. Serena Dyer, who is a historian of dress, consumption, and material culture. We are here today to have a conversation about the age-old question of where does fast fashion come from? We both have a theory that it begins in the Victorian period.
Yes, yeah, because we tend to think that it's this really connected to online and connected to social media and connected to the really high speed in which we all live our lives today. But actually, it's not like it's just suddenly popped up in the last 20 years. Like loads of things, it's got this context, it's got this longer history that we can trace back much further, and actually makes fast fashion far more interesting as part of a human story, as part of how we approach clothing, approach consumption, approach shopping. And I think we need to look back at those past iterations of fast fashion to really get to grips with the root of that.
And also, why did it come to exist? Because obviously no one set out to create this behemoth, destructive thing called fast fashion that was setting out to destroy society and destroy its workers. It set out with intentions of benefit, to improve society, to improve convenience.
Yes.
And then it became what it has become. But before we get into this whole discussion about the origins of fast fashion, we first have to have a word from our sponsor for today, Skillshare, who is very kindly funding all of the research for this video. Thank you, Skillshare. I am a huge fan of Skillshare, as you may or may not already know. The plethora of classes available in Skillshare's catalog, from lighting to cinematography to shooting with a DSLR camera, all the creative and technical aspects of video production have helped tremendously in producing videos like this for you to watch. There's also the community aspect of being able to ask questions and interact with your fellow students, which makes the learning process so much more fun and engaging. Presumably, if you have clicked on this video, you are interested in the subject of fast fashion and perhaps are looking for some activities to avoid the fast fashion option within your wardrobe, in which case I highly recommend Maura Max's course on sewing alterations. This is a really helpful course, especially if you are interested in thrifting, purchasing on Depop or Poshmark, or in your traditional charity shop, and are finding garments that you perhaps might need to adjust, alter a little bit to get them to fit you really nicely. The first 1,000 of my viewers to click the link in the description box below will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. Go forth and check that out. I will probably see you there. And now let's return to exploring perhaps how the Victorians might have had a hand in the explosive rise of fast fashion.
We all knew that fast fashion was an encroaching beast, swallowing up more and more of the fashion market share. 2 years ago, the Leicester sweatshop scandal exposed Boohoo for working with factories who paid their workers a miserable £3.50 an hour. We thought that this was a turning point. After all, with a huge crackdown on greenwashing and the deceptive use of sustainability as a marketing ploy, surely fashion was finally going in the right direction. But maybe we were all so distracted that a shiny new kid on the block managed to sneak in the back door, more fierce and powerful than any that came before: Shein. Shein's market share of the fast fashion industry skyrocketed. And lo and behold, in October 2022, journalist Iman Amrani exposed the horrendous working conditions and exploitative factories which enable the brand's business model. So, is it new to manufacture in sweatshops and to use atrociously compensated labour? No. Is the use of new forms of media to persuade consumers to buy more and more and more new? Nope. Is the development of new technologies specifically to meet those capitalist needs new? Also no. So although many of these practices can be traced even further back in time, I'm going to show you specifically how the Victorians were responsible for many of the same kinds of speedy sartorial attitudes which we see in fast fashion today. So I think that there are 3 key elements to fast fashion, which we can see in both the 2020s and in the 19th century. And those are speed, marketing, and manufacture. So fast fashion is not a flash in the pan phenomenon of the 2020s. It has a long history of creeping acceleration. And if we're not careful, it will only continue to get faster. Fast fashion skews how fashion consumers perceive of time in multiple ways, from the accelerated need for new items all the time to the devaluation of the time required to make new garments. And anybody who sews has probably felt the effects of this. Although this is also the result of an increasing reliance on ready-made garments and a decline in home sewing, fast fashion and the speeding up of the fashion cycle is also very much to blame. The fashion cycle is the introduction, rise, peak, decline and obsolescence of a fashion trend. The cycle has been getting faster and faster for centuries. So the first real fashion illustrations, so this is the equivalent of Vogue or Instagram influencers for the Georgians, were known as fashion plates. These aren't ceramic plates, these were engravings in annual diaries called pocketbooks, which were published once per year and which depicted garments that had been fashionable in the previous year. Wait, no. The diary for 59 is published in 58 with an image from 57, so you're actually 2 years out of date. Okay, cool. So while there were more nuanced changes in fashion if you were part of the London ton, for the 18th century fashion-conscious person, the cycle of fashion was annual. And these images were literally captioned the dress of the year. Now, let's fast forward a few decades to the Regency, at the start of the 19th century. Since the 1770s, fashion news has really sped up. Newspapers report what was worn at big London events, and magazines devoted to just fashion are now available. And by the time we get deeper into the 19th century, consumer expectation is for monthly fashion news and monthly fashion change. Each new issue of magazines, like the Englishwoman's Domestic magazine, came with a gorgeously tempting new fashion plate every month. That's quite a big speed up in a remarkably short period of time. Of course, just because fashion plates were produced that fast, it doesn't mean that people were buying new garments every month to keep up with that cycle. For most people, it wasn't even an option. So one of the pro-fast fashion arguments often made today is that it's the only affordable option for people on lower incomes. But all that this does is reveal deeper set economic inequalities across society. For the Victorians, new fashion was wildly expensive, so your own needle and thread was the only way of adapting clothes to keep up with fashion change if you were outside of a privileged elite. So the key means for understanding fashion time today is through fashion seasons. This global metronome for the fashion industry came out of the first fashion shows. Initially private, exclusive and informal events for elite clients, by the Edwardian era, fashion shows were a staple of the fashion calendar for designers like Paul Poiret and Lucille. By 1918, a twice-yearly spring, summer and autumn-winter fashion show had become the norm, paving the way for the fashion weeks that we know today. And as ready-to-wear garments took off in the 19th and 20th centuries, it was this seasonal structure that dominated high street fashion.
It's almost like it's not even seasons, because the Victorians were doing things almost by season. I mean, today with TikTok, it's like every week there's a new trend. Like, we can go season by season to an extent. We can't go week to week. Like, this is just ridiculous at this point.
So Shein have new items going up on their website every single day. I think when we're then looking back at the 19th century and saying, well, there's fast fashion roots in the 19th century, considering the resources that are available to those people, the intent to make it as fast as possible is there. If they had had access to modern social media and to modern kind of manufacturing techniques, I'm sure that they would have been trying to speed it up to match where we're at today.
It's interesting that you do bring up the desensitization to quality, because I absolutely find that everything made kind of post the 90s really is just such disappointing quality, and you can see it on the models, on the mannequins, on whoever's modeling the thing. You read it in the description, everything is polyester and acetate and whatever, and the blazers all look like sad and wrinkly and limp, and they're not a good quality garment. It does not look like that. It's like we've become so used to the quality of fast fashion that we no longer understand, many of us, what good quality clothing is, and it's so heartbreaking.
Yeah. Well, and Shein themselves have essentially produced fashion which is disposable single-use fashion.
Yes.
And
yeah, it's not meant to last.
No.
That's it.
And I think its consumers are perfectly happy with the fact that they might buy a dress for £3 or £4, wear it for one day, never wear it again, goes into landfill somewhere.
And that's the problem too, and like that needs to be clarified. That is the problem. It is the buy it, the wear it once to throw it away, the buy a new thing next week because it's trendy, wear it once and throw it away. The problem is not people needing to buy a high street blouse once or twice or 3 times a year because that is what they can afford.
Yeah.
Like that does not play into the system of fast fashion. If someone's behaving like, buying clothing in a normal way throughout the year, that does not fuel the system that they need to be able to produce clothing at that scale.
So in all areas of fashion, from magazines to high street collections, fashion has been speeding up, getting faster and faster for hundreds of years. Hey, we got through that section. Okay.
That was the long one.
Yeah, it was actually. It's the one I'm passionate about. Now we're getting all businessy. So, fashion seasons have sped up exponentially since the start of the 19th century. But why have consumers bought into this constant need for more? Both 19th century consumers flicking through their monthly magazines and 20th century consumers scrolling TikTok.
It would be 21st century scrolling through TikTok.
Yes, it would. I love that 1950s TikTok. Both 19th century consumers and 21st century consumers are manipulated by marketing into believing that they need to buy more and more and more. If we get a bit more academic for a moment, there are linguistic, social, and economic reasons for this. If we look at the language in early fashion magazines, we see words like novelty and newness being really frequently used. Everything is the latest fashion. It becomes less and less important what that fashion is, or whether it suits you as an individual, and more about its momentary uniqueness. As the middle class emerges in the 19th century, fashion becomes a key way that they can differentiate from working people and from the elites to create a sartorial class identity, ensuring that there is constantly something new that must be worn to signify membership of that class is a basic way of maintaining visual distinction. Alongside this class-based stratification was also the fabrication of aspirational fashion figures. Influencers may seem like a product of the social media age, but even some of the earliest 18th century fashion plates connected new fashions with the celebrities of the day. And there are more direct forms of marketing too, not least the birth of brands. Jaeger was founded in 1884 in Britain and used strategic marketing campaigns supported by scientific theories to create a sense of brand identity. The growing wealth of fashion magazines also increasingly included advertisement pages, flooding the consumer consciousness with more and more arguments to buy new innovations. These strategies are not that dissimilar to the game plan used by Shein today. The constant introduction of new must-have buys, the pressure of time-limited offers, and the loyalty manufactured by the construction of a highly recognisable brand all keep consumers coming back for more. Of course, some of the most significant issues around fast fashion today centre on the appalling conditions in which it is manufactured and its impact on the environment. Iman Amrani's expose on Shein revealed that workers were being paid 3 pence per garment and that they were expected to make 500 items per day just to earn their basic salary. This really is inhumane exploitation. But very sadly, it is not new. Victorian dressmakers also worked in appalling conditions. These worsening conditions were felt against the backdrop of the Industrial Revolution. Over the course of the 19th century, the landscape of Britain became dominated by smoke-puffing factories which employed workers in truly horrific conditions. As more and more clothes were produced ready-made, manufacturers compromised their workers' rights and health in order to turn a bigger profit. In the 1850s, the plight of the dressmaker became a central theme of reform novels, like G.W.M. Reynolds' The Seamstress of 1853, in which the heroine works all hours for a pittance in order to make the extravagant dresses worn by the ladies of the aristocracy. Yet she can barely afford food for herself. These novels were critiques of capitalism, but they also reflected the real conditions of the army of extremely poor garment workers who plied the needle behind the extravagant Victorian fashions admired by so many. And we must always remember that the fabrics themselves were often the product of enslaved labour overseas throughout the 19th century, long after slavery was abolished in Britain in 1807.
I mean, obviously there's no such thing as complete ethical production, I don't think. I look around at some brilliant small businesses who sell clothes and who do their best to source secondhand fabrics, or who, do manufacture in manufacturing facilities that do pay their workers living wages. And even though it is mass produced, it is ready to wear clothing, it's not fast fashion. So where's the line between something like Shein and something like Emmy Design, who a lot of us in historical costuming are very into? They're a very small brand, and even though nothing can be 100% ethically produced, I don't think, there's no way to fully meet that mark, there's still such a vast difference between Emmy and Shein.
But what Shein does compared to them is just ridiculous. Like the number of garments that they're producing, the prices that they are selling at, it just knocks all of those other fast fashion brands out of the park. And I think that sometimes it comes down to the intent behind it. With those brands like Emmy, the intent is to do as well as they possibly can. Obviously, they've still got to make a profit to be viable as a business, but to obviously be making strides to, give their workers good pay, good rights, days off that is more than one day a month. And actually have kind of good working conditions.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, because when you start talking about and looking at the accounts from the 1850s of the garment workers, it's very similar to what you hear about the garment workers producing clothing today in countries that are not necessarily, but sometimes our own. It hasn't changed. It's just moved. Yeah. You kind of can't have that and have people support that, because ethically it's just not realistic. Yeah. So as soon as people start finding out, you have to move it. Yeah. You have to put it out of sight, out of mind. They didn't have social media back then, but eventually it comes out in print in the magazines. Mm-hmm. And now, we have social media, it's coming out, and people are obviously rightfully not pleased about it.
Mm-hmm. But then I think that, like with the Leicester sweatshop scandal a few years ago, has anything changed? It becomes a kind of a brief thing that people get up in arms about, and then there are those of us that work in the industry that are more continually up in arms about it. But actually the kind of popular movement that is needed to say, no, we refuse to buy things that are made in these sweatshops, they don't tend to be very long-lived. So the problems continue unless we're constantly bombarding people with the realities behind those things that they are buying. It's very easy to forget about it again. It's behind a factory door. It's not your friends and colleagues that are experiencing this. These are people that you're probably not interacting with on a daily basis. And it makes it easy to just not pay attention to it.
That's, I think, part of the trouble with the fashion industry nowadays, is that it is so, for good reason, secretive, because, you can't just go selling all of your secrets and, the person next door is going to go take your business, especially if you are a small business, and that is your livelihood. But at the same time, that lack of transparency for what's going on in the manufacturing process makes it very easy to hide the sins.
Well, and there's so many other issues with these manufacturers as well, like Shein and Boohoo and things on ASOS have all been accused of stealing small designers' designs and work and producing...
Wonder what that's like.
And producing their own knockoff versions. It's been brought up by many people in the past. You might have to pay, £70 for a dress from somebody like that, but you can buy a knockoff of it for £4 on Shein. So that kind of value of the skill and the knowledge behind fashion is just being decimated even further. Just because this exploited labour is happening in 2020s China rather than in 1850s London does not make it any less real. In fact, I'd suggest that one of the drivers behind fast fashion today is how distant that making process seems. It's hidden behind closed factory doors, and consumers turn a blind eye to the hardships required to meet an assumed right to be trendy.
So what exactly do we do with this information? There is no one true solution to immediately solve fast fashion. This is something that has been perpetuated for hundreds of years. But I think it most immediately helps, firstly, just to have an awareness of precisely the scale of the problem. How do we at the very least prevent it from getting worse? Most of us, for most purposes in our lives, do not need to be buying clothing every week, let alone every month. But I think one of the most important things that we can do is to learn to appreciate quality in clothing, to learn to identify and to seek out items of clothing that are made with quality and that will last us more than 2 weeks, and potentially refashion it when we want something different. And that is one of the mentalities that throughout history, I think, has really worked. This ability to recognize quality in clothing, to seek out quality in clothing, so that we cherish it just a little bit more, so that we are incentivized to maintain it and to preserve it and to take good care of it. Because that sort of mentality directly combats the attitude that fast fashion corporations want us to have. This worthlessness, this disposability of fashion, this mentality that the clothing that we wear doesn't have to be of good quality, because ultimately the goal is for us to want to buy something new in 2 weeks' time, which is not, in any respect, a productive way to think about clothing. This hasn't been conveniently placed the whole video.
So, what's this wonderful book you have?
Let me tell you. So Serena has a fabulous book, and more than one, and several forthcoming. This one is called Material Lives, which it follows the lives of 4 women in the 18th century and sort of explores what they wore, what they owned, and how their material culture reflects the people that they are. It is a very fascinating book. You should definitely give it a read. You can also check out Serena on her YouTube channel, where she discusses dress history, fancy that, as well as on Instagram, on your website, buy her books. Go forth.
Yes, please.
Follow this one. She's awesome, and she knows lots of stuff about old clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeet.
That was easy.
Good. That was so easy.